We are back. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of BVM Sports Chalk Talk. I'm Lucas Semb, and as always, I'm here with Scott Procter and Matt Morris. We hope you enjoyed the NBA All-Star Weekend. On this week's show, we will be talking about the NBA a little bit in light of the Blake Griffin signing, but we will also talk NFL as Dak Prescott and the Cowboys have agreed to terms, and we will talk NCAA where Power 5 conference tournaments start this week. But to get things started, Scott, Dak and the Cowboys agree on a 4-year, $160 million deal, $75 million in the first year. Is Dak Prescott worth that kind of money?
Well, I'm not sure exactly if he's worth that money, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But first and foremost, I am so happy for Dak Prescott. This is someone who has earned their money, and I'm glad Jerry Jones quit being petty. Dak has the most 400-plus passing yard games since 2016. And he's improved every year since stepping in as a starter to the point where he was on pace to break the single-season passing record before, obviously, his gruesome injury this past season. People might be taken aback by the monstrous numbers attached to Dak's new deal, the $66 million signing bonus, the $75 million guaranteed in the first year, as you alluded to, Luke. But any disdain should be directed at Jerry Jones, who chose not to pay Dak after the 2018 season when he led the Cowboys to a playoff win and made the Pro Bowl, and then chose not to pay him after the 2019 season following his fourth consecutive season starting all 16 games. All the while, Ezekiel Elliott, Amari Cooper, defensive pieces, and offensive linemen were not only getting their money, but being overpaid. So when you're 2 years late on paying a franchise quarterback, you're going to overpay. And that's no one's fault other than Jerry and Stephen Jones. It's especially not the fault of Dak Prescott, who's been the consummate professional and leader for America's team. So as far as the Cowboys are concerned, this is the right move because you just locked up the best quarterback in the division by far. When you have that, you have a great chance of winning said division, which means you'll host at least one playoff game. And Dak has already proven he can win in the postseason. This is a long time coming, a great move for the Cowboys, and an even better one for Dak.
Yeah, Scott, I mean, not only was this the right move, it was the only move. I mean, if you look at what the quarterback class was as far as free agency goes, no one's better than Dak. Unless you were going to be able to somehow get the Texans to listen to a trade deal or reach out to Seattle and get Russell Wilson. I mean, there was nothing better than Dak. And Dak Prescott, to your point, has proven that he deserves to be the franchise quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys. And so you're right. We could talk about, is the price point correct? Is he worth that kind of money? Because he's making now, like Pat Mahomes type money in some ways. I mean, about $40 million a year. But it's because of the situation and the context within when this signing happened that you understand that Dak is worth this money because there's no better option. He's played amazing for the Cowboys. He's the only good thing the Cowboys have going for him right now after just a horrific season without him. And Dak's going to be, the face of the Cowboys moving forward.
Right. When you look at their options, Matt, you make a good point. They really didn't have that many. But I kind of look at it this way. I look at it from a money standpoint because they kind of handicapped themselves, if you ask me. So I see people on Twitter saying things along the lines of, Jerry Jones has insider, information on when the NFL is getting a new TV deal. It seems like this is a steal for the Cowboys. It just makes me think, though, Jerry Jones has had all of this info for the past 20 years, and that hasn't led them to any success. So in terms of looking at it from a future standpoint, it's hard to be, optimistic. But looking at it from a standpoint of what I know right now, they look handicapped. Like I said, you gave one player $160 million over 4 years. It's going to be hard to improve anywhere else. Their offensive line needs some help. Their defense needs more than some help. And now they're going to have a hard time trying to fill those holes other than through the draft. So the only players in this league that are worth that kind of money, they have to be truly generational. They have to be proven winners and lead your team. And the only guy that I can think of to that point is Patrick Mahomes. Dak's going to be 28 years old when the season starts. He's coming off of a gruesome injury, and now he's going to be the richest man in the NFL. He's won one playoff game with them in his 4 or 5 years, however long it's been since 2016. He's won one playoff game, and it was a wild card game. You can chalk that up to the team not being good enough or whatever you want, but bottom line, he's the team's leader, and he's got pieces, and they don't win games. So I don't think Prescott is a QB who alone can propel them to the Super Bowl, but they better hope he is, because they'll have a hard time adding any other pieces to that team at this point.
I mean, to that point, though, I mean, they're already the favorites in Vegas to win the NFC East once again, which means that they're guaranteed a home playoff game. As far as their weapons go, Ezekiel Elliott had an off year, but he's still Ezekiel Elliott. I mean, you got Amari Cooper, you have Michael Gallup, you have CeeDee Lamb. So the weapons are there. It's going to be really interesting to see how they address their defensive issues. And then if that offensive line can get healthy, then, maybe Dak does prove that not only is he worth this money, but he's going to lead a team that, to Scott's point, he was balling out. They weren't winning. They were 2-3, but he was going crazy in the beginning of that season.
Yes, he was.
And so if you take that all into account, there is still some hope in Dallas. And, I think Dak can at least lead them, I don't know, to a Super Bowl, but they're obviously going to get into the playoffs. And then at that point, it's really up to whoever, it's every given Sunday. Somebody can win. They could get lucky. They could get hot. So it'll be interesting to see what Dak does this upcoming season, what the Cowboys do to address some of their bigger issues.
And Luke, I get the money. And Luke, I get the money aspect, but again, this is on Jerry Jones. The fact that this price tag is what it is. He could have signed him 2 years ago for a much lesser price, and even a year ago for less than what he just gave Dak Prescott. But on the field, the NFL is a league of have and have-nots, especially at the quarterback position. Especially when you look at the NFC East. The Cowboys, as I mentioned, have far and away the best quarterback in the division. The Washington doesn't have a quarterback. The Giants think they have a quarterback in Daniel Jones, and Philadelphia hopes they have a quarterback in Jalen Hurts.
He's coming.
I like Jalen Hurts. We'll see. But again, the Cowboys have put themselves in the position where, again, they have the best quarterback, and that lends itself typically to winning games, getting you a playoff berth. And, from there, hopefully – the money that you gave Dak, he proves to be worth it. And again, at this point, 5 years into his career, I think he's proven that he's worth it, and he's a quarterback that can take, with talent around him. I think he's the type of quarterback that can take the team over the top. And, Jerry Jones ain't getting any younger. I believe he's 78 years old. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't have any more time to waste. So you have a quarterback like Dak Prescott in your building. You have to do what it takes to keep him, even if it's 2 years late.
Right. To me, this is just deeper than the NFC East, because with those weapons that you guys mentioned, they should be winning the NFC East. And now with Dak there, they absolutely should be winning the NFC East. But it's about if they can win past that. And Dak hasn't proven that. He has 2 divisional round losses. He's missed the playoff 2 years, and he has 1 wild card win. And like you guys mentioned, those weapons on offense, again, he has those. Their offense has been fine. That's why he's putting up numbers. But now their defense has all these holes that won't be addressed. So, I mean, I think Dak's a great quarterback. He deserved a lot of money, but not as much. And maybe even him, he should have put that pride aside. If he wants to be a winner, he knows he needs help. And I think that's shown throughout his years there.
And also, too, I don't think the defense is as in shambles as people like to think. There's talent on that defense. I think more of anything, it's been a product of coaching. Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch are, Pro Bowl caliber talents at the linebacker position. They still have DeMarcus Lawrence, who, again, is one of those players who Jerry Jones overpaid. He's still a star talent. If anything, that back end needs help. I think they'll, select Patrick Surtain out of Alabama with their first-round pick, as they should, to shore up, that defensive backfield. But, again, the talent is there. It's really always been about, with the Dallas Cowboys, coaching and getting the best out of your players on the field. So, obviously, Dak Prescott will be under a ton of pressure. Obviously with all this money coming into his bank account here over the next few months and years. But Mike McCarthy is going to be under a hell of a lot of pressure if he doesn't get the most out of, this Cowboys roster in a sorry NFC East.
Right. I think one thing we all can agree on is Dak's a great QB, and we're excited to see him back in action after missing last season. There's no doubt he vastly improves the Cowboys team. But let's move on to the NBA, where we've had an intriguing signing with Blake Griffin heading to Brooklyn, joining Kyrie, Harden, and KD. Matt, does this put the Nets over the top?
I think it really does help them a lot. And when you start looking at the NBA, I mean, we talk so much about the regular season doesn't really matter. We're talking about post-game or the postseason. We're talking about the playoffs. And I think Blake Griffin down the line is going to be a guy that can absolutely help the Nets. And I think there's some context to, what has been going on since 2019. Because obviously that was technically the year that, Blake had his last truly great season. He only played 18 games last season. He played 20 this year. His usage rate this year has been down to the lowest it has ever been. It's about 19%. And not only that, but Detroit was clearly moving on and trying to give the ball to their younger forwards a lot more. I mean, going out signing Jeremy Grant. They've been working with Sadiq Bey, Josh Jackson, Sekou Doumbouya. Like, those guys are more of the future of Detroit than Blake Griffin ever was. And so Blake was not going to be used correctly or be the guy that they wanted him to be. So his numbers dropped off. And not only that, but when you look at what he can add to the Nets, if just going off of his season this year so far, from 25 feet to 29 feet out, Blake Griffin was shooting 35%. You know, in catch and shoot situations, Blake Griffin was shooting 34.6%, which is what you probably would expect him to do in that lineup when you have obviously the ball going to James Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant first. Griffin can sneak out to the three-point line, be ready for when the ball gets kicked out to him, and drill that shot. And then another interesting part, and this is what I'm most excited about, is Blake Griffin in the pick and roll situations that will be set up with Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and James Harden. And even when he's the ball handler as well, he still can create mismatches off of that pick and roll where if you're going to sell out on James Harden or Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant, you're going to get in trouble because there's going to be a Blake Griffin either rolling to the hoop or he's going to flare out to the three-point line and drill that shot. And then vice versa, if he's a great ball handler now. He's improved that part of his game over the last 3 years in Detroit, becoming one of those guys. And James Harden alluded to it over the weekend, talking about that part of Blake Griffin's game. If you give him the ball and now you're having to, have Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant or James Harden setting the screen for Blake Griffin, then you have to make that decision as well. And it creates defensive mismatches that when you look into, the deep part of the postseason, when you're looking at a game 4, a game 5, the fourth quarter, those are going to be dangerous moments where you just aren't going to know what to do as far as a defense. And that's when Blake Griffin going to the Nets is going to mean the difference between, the Nets just going in and being competitive and making it and then being dominating in the postseason.
In 2014, I might have been worried about Blake rolling to the rim. These days, I'm not. And you mentioned the 35% catch and shoot.
He's still 61% from shots inside 5 feet. So
well, he should be. He's
dangerous.
Like 6'8", and he's a bruiser. But you mentioned the 35% catch and shoot rates. I think that's a league average, if not worse than league average. If you look at those numbers. So for the Nets, they're going to expect him to come in, and his fit's going to be. We've seen they mentioned he's going to be a small ball center off the bench. I don't know if that's the fit for him. Scott, what do you think?
Yeah, I honestly think Matt said a lot of great things, especially when talking about that pick and roll, pick and pop situations. We've already seen Kyrie Irving throw some ridiculous dimes and kind of reinvent, DeAndre Jordan's career late in his career. And we already know the type of passer James Harden is. So it's going to be
to DeAndre Jordan's credit, he's still athletic.
Yeah, I would argue so is Blake Griffin. And I think we'll see that over the next few months here. But, back to the point, Blake Griffin makes the Brooklyn Nets better, period. And that's scary to say, considering the Brooklyn Nets already appeared to be the favorites to win the Eastern Conference. But this isn't a closed case to me just yet. First off, for Blake, I believe the only better move he could have made was to join the Lakers. What a change in scenery and being back in a winning environment can do for a player's psyche. And in turn, their on-court play cannot be ignored, especially when that change of scenery takes you from the city of Detroit to Brooklyn, New York. All love to Detroit, though. But Blake is reunited with his former teammate DeAndre Jordan, and as I said on the From Deep podcast, where you can get wherever your podcasts are available, I believe he has something to offer a championship caliber team. His last full season, as Matt alluded to in the 2018-2019 season, he gave you 24, 7, and 5 and was an all-star. But he's only played 38 games over the last 2 seasons, and he's also shot the ball terribly from deep during that span. That's a product of him taking 6 3-pointers a game the last 2 seasons. But I'm here to tell you right now, that ain't happening in Brooklyn. In fact, Blake Griffin is shooting an impressive 44% on wide open threes, which is the exact same percentage as his new teammate Kyrie Irving.
Scott, I hate to cut you off. Actually,
No, you don't. Don't say that. Just say you want to cut me off. Don't say you hate. Don't say you hate.
No, I love to cut you off, and I just have to say, you mentioned how Blake Griffin is settling for 6 threes a game. Correct. That's what happens when you get to the later stages in your career. That athleticism starts to go. He hasn't dunked in 2 years. You have to turn into a pick and popper.
As Matt alluded to, I think that's more of a result of playing in Detroit when you're looked at as the number one option and you have the freedom to do more with your game. It's just going to be completely different in Brooklyn.
Potentially, but to my point, when you get a little older, you need to end up being a shooter, right? We've seen this time and time again with guys who get.
And he's shown he can do that. But yes, I agree.
Carter turned into a sniper, and that's why he lasted so long in the league. LeBron James is one of, in my opinion, the best shooters in the league because he can hit it over someone. He can hit it from the logo. We've seen this time and time again. His game, these top players, their games just turning into different styles, and Blake has struggled to do that.
And I think, again, you're right. You're right. He's going to be more of a shooter with the Brooklyn. And, again, that bodes well to him. As I was saying, before, you jumped in there, he's shooting 44% of wide open threes, which is the same exact percentage as Kyrie Irving. This better than all-star big men Nikola Jokic and Nikola Vucevic. He'll get a lot more of those wide open looks with so much attention on the big three. And, and him being a spacing, playmaking, big with that second unit can be scary. But, where my skepticism creeps in, the big three has only played 7 games together. And it's not that I don't think KD will transition or he won't transition seamlessly into the lineup, because I know he will. But they just need game reps together to solidify that closing 5 lineup, figure out rotations, and shore up that defense that's still bottom 4 in points allowed. We still cannot overlook that just because Blake Griffin is in town. So, with all that being said, I'm still interested to see how a playoff series with the Philadelphia 76ers and their defensive pieces would go. So I'm not ready to, crown Brooklyn the Eastern Conference champions just yet, just because Blake Griffin is on the roster.
Sure. And, on this show, roughly a month ago, I said Blake Griffin would be a contributor to a contending team. It'd have to be the right fit. He's going to need to accept whatever role he's given. And there were spots where that would be possible. I don't think Brooklyn was one of those. They said he's going to be used as a small ball center. That's not the fit I was talking about. The Nets are a team that
Okay, well, I have to cut you off then. What ideally would be Blake Griffin's role on a championship contending team at this point? If not a small ball center in kind of a second lineup, what's better than that?
My whole point is that I don't really think he can be that guy on a championship team. I don't think he can be a role player. I don't think he can. Excuse me?
Didn't you just say he could be a piece on a championship contending? Didn't you just say you said that a few months
No, you're right. You're right. Here I am. I'm putting my foot in my mouth, like you guys like to say.
All right.
Like I had mentioned, I think Phoenix would have been that spot for him, playing with Chris Paul, the point god.
But that wouldn't have worked. Him and CP3 fell out, and that just wasn't going to happen again.
I think
not only that, but Chris Paul is just as creative as James Harden. James Harden's having an MVP-type season, dishing the ball to everybody. I mean, he's point guard this year. So I don't get why that looks better on paper than it would in Brooklyn. If that's
I agree, Matt. You got some explaining to do, Luke.
Like, come on.
Well, I think that Chris Paul is the best point guard passing-wise that possibly the NBA has ever seen. And I think he has that repertoire with playing with Blake Griffin, where they would be able to, mesh at this late stage in their career. And that's like I mentioned in our previous episode. They've played together. They know what it takes. They've been to high levels before. And now you throw Devin Booker in there. The Suns are the number 2 team in the league right now.
You don't have to tell me about the Suns. I know how good they are.
The Suns are playing better than the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, see, this is where the problem is for me. The Nets needed to address athleticism and defense, and signing him, they did neither.
Okay.
This isn't 2014. People are making way bigger a deal about this than I think they should. Blake has built some name equity, and Matt or Scott, I'm big on name equity.
I know you're huge on equity.
He's built that throughout his career. But at this point, I think that's mainly all it is.
So it's a little confusing. It's a little confusing as someone who's so big on equity and, building your name. And even in a later stage, people have to respect you. It's a little confusing hearing you talk, sourly on Blake Griffin, who is, of course, built that equity. He's a multiple-time All-Star, former Rookie of the Year. It's a little surprising to hear this from you.
Absolutely. But what he built his equity through, he doesn't do anymore. So that's where the problem comes in.
Okay.
He's the big name, but the athleticism is way down. His defense has never been anything to write home about. I think it's probably worth the $1 million they're giving him to see if he'll resurrect his career. But people need to stop saying, wow, Kyrie, Harden, KD, and Griffin on the same team, because Blake does not deserve to be in the same breath as those 3 guys. And And I think he could be maybe a 10.5 rebound guy for them off the bench, but he's not putting them over the top. They're in the same spot they were a couple weeks ago, which is missing a serviceable starting center.
I mean, to your point, though, Luke, getting that name equity and all of that, Blake Griffin in 2019 showed that without not focusing on his athleticism, he can be a dynamic player in the NBA with an outside shot, good ball handling, and driving to the hoop. But if you look at the context of the last 2 years, he hasn't had that opportunity to do it. He's played 38 games.
He's only played 38 games over the last 2 seasons.
Like, and who do you chalk that up to? He's injury prone. He didn't like his fit in Detroit.
Yeah, he more about.
So is that even a guy you really want in your locker room? A guy who gave up on a team. He gave up on his coach.
Hey,
no one's saying Blake Griffin gave up.
Is James Harden a guy Brooklyn would want after leaving out of Houston and not wanting to be in Houston?
James Harden took a team with Patrick Beverley, Dwight Howard, Alexei Shved, Pablo Prigioni.
To what?
He took them to 56 wins in the Western Conference Finals.
Blake Griffin
so I think their situations
are you kidding me? Are you going to give
different.
that example? Blake Griffin took a team with Reggie Jackson to the playoffs.
He took them to the 8th seed in a sweep by the Milwaukee Bucks. Congrats.
As the best player on the team.
To the playoffs. If you're going to use that example of James Harden, like Blake Griffin in 2019.
Because James Harden took the Rockets to the Western Conference Finals. So I think he has a right to be mad because he got to that stage literally by himself. Blake Griffin cannot, will not, and has never done that.
So before we move on, let's wrap up here. So you said your idea your thought process on the Nets hasn't really changed much. Where do you see their ceiling is right now at this point in the season?
Again, I think everything is as it was. I think he'll come off the bench and he'll do 10-5, and that's not going to put them above the Bucks. And I think when it gets down to the Eastern Conference Finals, it's going to be Bucks Nets, and I have the Bucks taking that home. And my opinion hasn't changed, and it remains there. I think this move keeps them above the 76ers. I think it keeps them right in between the Sixers and the Bucks, and I hold true to that.
That's lovely. That's great for me.
Well, okay, let's stay on the court but move down to the NCAA where the home stretch to March Madness has begun. Most small to mid-major conference tournaments are already completed, and Power 5 conference tournaments start this week. So we will be discussing the Big 12 and who we think will be coming out victorious. I'm going to go first. For me, this is Baylor, and this one seems super simple. The Baylor Bears have been dominating college basketball, and they will dominate the Big 12 tournament. This year, they beat Illinois, they beat Oklahoma, they beat Kansas, they beat Texas Tech twice, they beat Oklahoma State twice, they beat Texas, they beat West Virginia. Those are all ranked teams that they beat this year. Many of them twice. Matt, your team, Oklahoma State, twice. And they're 27-1. Their sole loss was on the road to no other than Bill Self's Jayhawks, a school who always brings in top recruits. They're up there with the North Carolinas and the Dukes and the Kentuckys, and they were rolling at that time. A couple days ago, Baylor had Masio Teague knocked down 10 3-pointers, tying Trae Young's for second most makes in a single Big 12 game. They have 6 guys shooting 39% or better from 3 on the year on a minimum of 30 attempts. They run their fast break so well with shooters spotting up on every open spot of the wing. Their leading rebounder is guard Mark Vitale, who can push the floor and start a break following a rebound. They've got one of the best coaches with Scott Drew at the helm. This is a team that has barely been challenged this season, and I don't see anybody stopping them on their way to the Big 12 title.
Well, look, I mean, you mentioned it. I believe in Oklahoma State. If there is going to be a team that goes in there and beats Baylor, it's going to be the Cowboys because, one, that game that you referenced last week was actually a 4-point game going into the last 2 minutes, and then Cade Cunningham gets hurt and isn't able to finish a game where he was going off. I mean, he had 24 points at that point. I mean, that was a great game where the score doesn't really represent how the game was actually played for the majority of it. I mean, OK State stayed in it. I mean, they were a very competitive team against Baylor and gave them a run for their money. Then, over the weekend, without Cade Cunningham, they went into West Virginia and beat, a top 10 ranked West Virginia team without their best player. And not only that, but the Cowboys are second in the nation with quad 1 wins at 8-5, only behind Illinois. So they're winning quality games. And not only that, but they lead the Big 12 in rebounding. They lead the Big 12 in blocks, and they're second in steals only to Baylor. This is a team that is young, athletic. If Cade Cunningham comes back, they have the star power to just have a guy take over the game. And they're not afraid of anyone. It's not going to be this like, oh, they're going into Baylor and they're intimidated by it. They already went into Baylor and they almost lost even when their best player got hurt. This is a young, competitive team that doesn't fear anyone. And when it comes to the Big 12 tournament, if they face up against Baylor, they're not going to blink, and they can be deadly. And Baylor is going to have to take them seriously, because I think Oklahoma State is clearly number 2, if not one of the favorites to win the Big 12 tournament.
Matt, I get your point, but I just don't think almost and what ifs are going to win you the Big 12 title.
All we talk, it's a debate show. Almost and what ifs is exactly what we're talking about.
On that note,
but I'm talking about Baylor. They haven't done what ifs and almost. They're 27-1. They've proved all year long they don't need those what ifs.
Baylor was gone for an entire month. We don't know what would have happened during that time. Like, they're literally just getting back from being gone for a month. They are still recovering from that. And as they continue to improve and continue to re-solidify their dominance, Oklahoma State has appeared as a team that can not only compete with them, but beat them. You cannot go into this Big 12 tournament and just say that that Baylor is going to win. I mean, I thought that about Michigan, and then Illinois, without their best player, went in and beat Michigan. If anything has been shown this year, that's the best conference in college basketball. Anybody can beat anybody on any given night, and Oklahoma State definitely has earned the right to say, we have a chance to beat Baylor, and they should be worried about us when it comes to the Big 12 tournament.
They absolutely earn the right to say we have a chance, but that's about where I draw the line. I love Cade Cunningham. In my opinion, he's a generational talent, but he's not going to be enough. Scott, what do you think?
I think both of you make great points, but Luke, on that note there at the end, if you think Cade Cunningham is a generational talent, which I think all of us on this panel do, I don't think we can really truly write Oklahoma State off in the Big 12 tournament or when March Madness begins. Cade Cunningham arrived at Oklahoma State as the expected number 1 pick in the 2021 NBA draft, and all he's done since then is solidify that notion. This is a walking bucket with all the skills that translate. He can handle, he can create, shoot, finish. He's now one of 4 players to win the Big 12 Player and Freshman of the Year. Kevin Durant, Michael Beasley, and Marcus Smart are the others. This is just elite company. But as much as I hate to agree with Lucas Semb, the Baylor Bears look every part of a Final Four team to me, and I don't envision them losing again until late March. Luke and I have had this conversation on the show when it came to Loyola Chicago a couple weeks back. I sometimes think it's necessary for teams on long winning streaks to take a loss. I can't definitively explain it. There's no exact science, but there's a mental component that comes into play, I believe, where teams are more focused on not losing than winning at a certain point. With that being said, Baylor got their loss out of the way to a good Kansas team after 18 consecutive wins. And the real reasons why I believe they'll roll through the Big 12 tournament is because of how they responded. The Bears take their first L of the season and then come out and beat 3 top 20 Big 12 opponents to close the regular season. West Virginia, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, in that order. This team shoots the lights out, shares the ball, and is an exceptionally well coached by Scott Drew. Jared Butler is one of the best players in the entire country. He will be a first-team All-American right along with Cade Cunningham. So like I said at the top, Baylor appears to be a Final Four team, and I think the Big 12 tournament will really just be an appetizer for the Bears.
Absolutely. March Madness is long overdue after not playing the tournament last year. Schools and fans alike are raring to get into some NCAA tournament action. Make sure to follow along this week so you can nail those March Madness brackets when the time comes. But that's all we've got for today. For myself, Scott Procter, and Matt Morris, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.